the family dynamics, which the vast majority of businesses are just glossed over, and I think we were able to kind of dive into it. So yeah, Thor, we were like Curtis and I mean, you could barely tear us apart. We were talking about, husband and wife deal, working together, siblings, parents, children, grandkids, legacy, values, identity. And we were having a ton of fun diving into it.
Well, I think a lot of reasons why, sometimes there's less family business stuff talked about is because it's so personal.
Yeah.
And, some of this stuff, is really personal. And some of it also, depending on the story, well, it doesn't matter all the stories or whatever. There's aspects of it that are very unpleasant to talk about.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you know it, or especially, like in my particular case, my family had been operating, in business in the St. Louis area for over 100 years.
Right.
And, if something goes a little bit, less than perfect, sometimes people don't like to talk about that. And so that's so that's kind of like an important thing that I wanted to mention, because there's
there's also the flip side of it, right? Where family businesses can bring families together in an unimaginable way, and really live a deeper connection as well throughout generations. So it's the gift and the curse.
Yeah, it's true. It's a double-edged sword always.
Yeah.
And so, like I say, so for me, it was certainly cathartic because so many of these problems that you have, especially when you're working in your business and you're so focused, you think, oh, it's just got to be me. And because you're not really doing too much of like stuff like this right now, where you're talking to other guys who you guys handle this every day. When you're operating a business, you don't handle it every day. You're handling your own business every day.
Yeah.
And so it's so easy to lose that focus. And so like I say, that event was really a lot of fun, and it was really, like I say, cathartic for me because I was like, oh, you know what, not having the same problem. So
for over 100 years, the venture was operating. Tell me about the early days of you growing up within the business. What kind of exposure you had in the business? I'd love to just hear kick it off with that.
Yeah, sure. So totally. So really, honestly, when I was a kid, I was really fortunate, because I had an opportunity to kind of work in the business from an early, age. And so I was, picking weeds, and I would punch in every day at the shop, you know what I mean, and it was really a lot of fun. And really kind of grew up in and around it. When my dad passed away when I was 13, but before then, I went to a private school that was right next door to the dealership, actually. So I would actually, oftentimes I'd finish up school and I'd go and, be at the dealership from, like 4 till 8 when we wrapped up or whatever. Yeah. And so it was fun, and I got a lot of exposure, at that, very early age. And I was really, it was neat to be a part of that. And so that was a lot of fun. It was, my dad and then my uncle were always there. And my grandpa, of course. And so, yeah, it was fun. There were times, honestly, especially in the summertime, I would work and we'd be keeping the lot really clean and all that stuff. And there were times where, of course, I hated it because you're out there when all the other kids are, playing and stuff, and you're picking weeds. But now it's funny. I look back on that night. I still have the scars. My fingers have permanently malformed from picking weeds, actually, in the heat. But I look so fondly back on it now because it was really a lot of fun, driving all the cars around and parking them and stuff. So yeah, from an early age, I was pretty much working in it. And so that's kind of that question. That was fun. I was happy to have that opportunity.
So let's see here. So you were the fourth generation, right? So
yeah, that's right.
So grandpa, and there was great grandpa before him, right?
Yeah. So great grandpa is the guy who actually founded it, and he was one of the 13 original charter members that basically sell in the Dodge franchise. So he met with John and Horace Dodge and got the franchise going, and so yeah, kind of some cool history there. So we were basically the oldest continuing Dodge dealer in the country and in the world. Basically up until when we sold.
Yeah.
So
And so at what point, so you went to college, got your finance degree. At what point did you kind of get introduced back into the business?
At the time when my wife and I got married, uh, I was actually working in finance right out of school, and I graduated in '08 basically. Wonderful, exciting time to jump into the finance world. And I was working at an investment advisory firm essentially, and met my wife. And I was not really that involved in the business actually at that stage.
Okay.
I was kind of going a different direction. And, I met my wife, and then we decided, hey, get married, here's an opportunity. So we took a 3-month honeymoon and traveled around. My wife is from Russia. So traveled to Europe and stayed in Russia for a while, and took some time and came back, and we were living in Chicago. I was still working in finance, and my grandfather passed. I don't know, around that time, before that time, basically, that I kind of felt called to get back into the family business. Chicago, I was living in Chicago, and it's not that far away from my family, but we had the family there. The business had grown a lot, and and I just, honestly, I just said, to my uncle, I said, hey, would there be space for me if I decided to come back? And he said, yeah, there would be. So kind of got back into it, from there, and it was a I don't exactly know why. Like I say, other than that, I just felt kind of called back to the family business, to kind of getting back there. I kind of felt like it would be wonderful to get some experience that I had not gotten before up till then. Before then, I was mostly doing a lot of sales and a lot of stuff like that, which is a lot of fun, but I hadn't done anything really operationally. And so that's how that return journey kind of happened again.
How was working with your uncle?
Well, you know what? Working with my uncle had, he's a very interesting guy. He's and a really wonderful guy. Any family dynamic, of course, there's always things that happen, and also people change.
Right.
And I change, he changes. Of course, there's times where you're kind of maybe not seeing eye to eye on
Right.
everything. The biggest probably difference between my uncle and I is that I'm really optimistic, and I always see a glass half full. And he was more he would say he was more realistic, but I would say kind of bordering on pessimism sometimes. And so sometimes that was difficult
Yeah.
for me because my approach was always very, very different.
And so, I guess, what was your initial position at the company after graduating and kind of making the
Yeah.
decision to come
Yeah.
back, and give me an idea of like the size, like how many employees did you all have at that
Well,
point?
so yeah, around that time, so we were operating two franchise kind of sized dealerships, and we had about, it would fluctuate depending on how things go, but around 50 to 75 employees per store,
Okay.
and maybe more sometimes too.
Yeah.
So around that size. When I first came back, I started off. So car dealerships are set up where they got basically a lot of stuff is vertically integrated, and you kind of do things. So for instance, like service, you've got service, you got sales, you got your back office, which is almost usually run in-house. And then you've got your financing department, which is actually setting up, getting the cars financed by the banks or whatever. So you have
Right.
relationships with a lot of banks, national and local and whatnot. And my uncle had a very, very strong fixed operations background. That's what in the car business, that's what we call the service department, basically.
Okay.
And so he really felt, and in fact, if you go to a lot of dealerships and you talk to a lot of guys, that's an area where a lot of, especially owners and operators, don't have a whole lot of strength in because they just never really worked in the shop. It's kind of considered, you know, yeah, it just was kind of like an afterthought in a lot of cases, it
I
seems.
see what you mean. So that's why you kind of mentioned he's a car guy. Had
That's right.
that hands-on experience in the
Totally.
repair
So
center service.
I started off in fixed operations and doing, basically, especially warranty administration. Warranty administration is where you're working with the factory to get cars, that are under warranty, get that job paid. And so you have to provide documentation and all that stuff. which was a great experience and a lot of fun and a very, very unique. I'm happy that I started there. That is not a place that I would have picked myself, truth be
Yeah.
told.
Yeah.
And it was a great experience. And it was a great experience too, because the people I was working with, the gentleman who at the time was the director of our fixed operations for the whole, organization, was a guy named Michael Harrell, who had actually worked with my great grandfather, had worked with my grandfather, had worked with my dad and my uncle, and then now was working with me. So
Wow.
this guy was able to tell me stories that my great grandpa had about how you take care of clients, how you have to be, sensitive, and really you're like a doctor when you're, in the shop because you're communicating. Obviously it's not quite as extreme as a loved one, but people need their cars to get around and
Yeah.
get to work to take care of their loved ones, so it's not that far off. And so it was a lot of fun hearing all my great grandpa and my grandpa's anecdotes from working with a guy side by side on all that stuff.
And how long did you stay in that department?
I was there well, I ended up basically being there for probably about 3 years, kind of working through that whole department though. So
Awesome.
basically kind of doing a lot of things. And I will say that one of the virtues or vices, I don't know, of the family business thing is that once you end up getting into it, again, especially if you were, coming after a break or whatever, which is common in the family businesses, by the way. I'm not the only guy that came back to the family business after doing
Right.
something else. One of the virtues or vices is that you end up wearing a lot of hats really fast because, of course, the whole goal is to say, okay, well, hey, what's the next shot? Or as you guys in accounting might call it, succession planning or whatever. So if you're gonna have somebody that can actually step in, what are all those things that you actually do?
At that Mainstreet Summit conference, I remember the presentation with the lumber business out of Tennessee.
Yeah, Mr.
New
Hales.
person that comes into the business works in the yard for the first 6 months.
Yeah.
So it sounds like not everybody's mandated, but you got that hands-on experience and getting to know the key employees that help the venture really thrive.
It was fantastic because as a warranty administrator, one of the things I also was doing, I was handling the cash register. Quite literally, I was at the cash register. And that was great too, because of course I was taking all the down payments from clients that were doing all that stuff. So I was talking to all the clients in addition to that. And, that honestly, that working in the yard thing, there's really something to that.
Yeah.
I can tell you right now. And there's, of course, I'm maybe a different type of personality, although I've met a lot of different types of people that were in this business. There's certain people who are like, oh man, I'm not going to do that. You know what I mean? I got a degree. I was working. I got this history or whatever. That's not for me. And I was never really that type of person personally, although I can see how that's a certain personality type. That's okay. But for me, I wouldn't have done it anything differently. If you would have said, "Oh, Curtis, hey, we're gonna rewrite history, and you get to start off, here in management," I just wouldn't have done it. You know what I mean? It's because, like you say, getting especially coming from the outside, who is this guy? Okay, well, yeah, his name is on the building, but I don't know this guy. He's only been here for however many months, years, or whatever. Yes, I had worked there since I was 12. In some cases, but
Yeah.
it's
It had been a while since you had that direct relationship with management and other key employees.
correct, correct. Certainly in our case, as a family business, how we were operating, it ended up working out great. So we started, talking about, selling it, and then we actually went through with, selling it. And at that stage, we had divested ourselves of that dealership. And then I was going to move over to the other dealership, and I
Right.
started working there and was getting more into basically working in the office, basically operations, doing some, management more in the sales side. So I
Yeah.
actually ended up doing used car management, essentially, is what they call
Okay.
it. Because within the department of sales, you've got basically new and used.
Yeah.
And so that's what I kind of started doing after that. But honestly, I wish I was having conversations like this with guys like you 10 years ago. I would definitely, encourage a young man who's in a family business to not be so focused on the actual business, but also think about, having conversations with other guys, and maybe you can pick something up. Just simple stuff like, how a lease is going to affect the value of a real estate down the road. All of the stuff that, honestly, when you're selling cars, I mean, not even thinking about it. And then it's not real until it is. We went from a small little dealership literally on Main Street. I mean, here we're at the Main Street Summit. We were on Main Street. Went from that to we spent, $6 million, building a new dealership on 10 acres or whatever. And we went from a little downtown dealership to now we're selling a whole lot of, selling a lot of cars relatively.
Yeah.
This place across the street had done a similar thing around the same time we had. And the gentleman who was older didn't have any family that wanted to get into it, and he was going to get out of it. And we ended up, buying his concern. And so, it's yeah. So I would say, yeah, in the history of the company, of course, it would be hard
Yeah.
to say. I mean, the family
Because
had conquered the.
getting into that location was unique in and of itself. It was
Yeah,
new.
it,
Yeah.
it, it was, yeah. But I mean, here, that's not to speak of the 1919 pandemic flu that,
Right.
our family went, the 1919 one, not 2019.
Right.
I'm talking about the first one. The First World War, the Second World War, the
Wow.
Great Depression, it goes without saying. I mean, so like there obviously were there pivotal times in the business,
Yeah.
oh yeah, over 100 years,
Right.
we encountered those.
I mean, whose decision was it? Was it your uncle and yourself, or was it, how was it? Tell us about that decision.
Yeah, and so the dynamic was this that, after my grandfather died, I was a mine. So it was on the business side, it was me and my uncle that were the partners.
Right.
I was a minority partner.
Right.
So my uncle was very, very respectful of my opinion and really did take a lot of my, ideas and whatnot into consideration. But how it is when you're a minority partner, I don't know, maybe you don't. The fact is that that puts you in a particular position when it comes to
Right.
decisions getting made. By the way, also there's other family members that are involved that aren't maybe necessarily on paper part of the business,
Right.
but are part of the business by virtue of being family. And the sale was not easy.
Okay.
It was not easy. We tried to do it everything. Actually, at both times that we did it, I mean, one of the primary considerations we had was the people that we were with.
Right.
We were really trying hard to set it up to where that was kind of understood up front.
Mhm.
So
So was it in 2019 that the ultimate sale of the second location?
no, it was a little bit after that. Yeah, so we operated through COVID,
Yeah.
and now at that stage we had sold our GMC franchise, and now we were, basically operating just the Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram franchise. It was a really cool building. If you guys are ever in the area, let me know. Like I say, it has a train car built into it, so that's unique. I think we were the only dealership in the country with a train car built into it. At least we were as of then, which is pretty cool. Was working a lot in the business, in the family business, and a lot of guys. Another thing I would say, if you're ever out there talking to these guys, you talk to them every day. Health is wealth. I was focused on my business. I wasn't having conversations like this. I also wasn't taking care of myself. I was on the chicken McNugget and Red Bull diet, which was pretty much all I ate and drank. And I was working sometimes 80 hours a week. And I got a autoimmune disorder called lupus nephritis,
Okay.
and which took some time to diagnose. At my worst, this was actually right around the time we were selling the first place.
Okay.
And took some time to diagnose. At my worst, I lost my ability to walk, actually. And I'm a pretty active guy. I was bedridden, and wife stuck by my side. My family was right there with me. And as a result of that, operating during COVID after the sale, it was pretty stressful for me because, we were an essential business, but I had an autoimmune disorder where if I got this thing, the doctors are like, hey, we don't even know what this thing is. And you've got a severe autoimmune disorder.
Right.
And I ended up just making the call and just kind of going in and working anyway. And so, thank God, everything worked out all right there. But it was high. It was stressful. The truth is that, you know, if I could even just, if my story, or if somebody could look at the scar and say, oh, hey, wow, that's a gnarly one, tell me about that, and it helped one guy, I'd feel pretty good about it.
Yep.
That's why we're doing it.
Yeah,
That's
and
exactly
so a lot of this stuff is pretty uncomfortable because a lot of people around here, in my town, they know me, they know my family.
Yeah.
No one likes to talk about the nasty stuff when you take a broom to the cobwebs in your office. You know what I'm saying? And no one wants to talk about that. And I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to relive it, but,
Right.
I've healed a lot. And the truth is that, it's real, that stuff
Yeah.
happens. A lot of times you're so focused on the business that you're not doing calls like this. You're also not maybe doing some of the regular type of, like your website says, hey, you have SOPs, you have all these things. Doesn't matter. It's a family business. Everybody knows each other. There's certain things that you just got to do.
Working 80 hours a week, I mean, you're just putting out fires. It's
right.
nonstop. You can't exercise. Your fastest way to feed yourself is McDonald's. I understand.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, of course, like what your guys are doing, like where you're basically outsourcing as a CFO or whatever. We never did any of that. We were just doing it all ourselves. We started working through the pandemic, working through the office stuff, and slowly kind of coming to the conclusion that we were going to try to figure out a way to, sell the place. And of course, at the time, everything was kind of up in the air. And I thought, well, hey, maybe I can actually make this thing work. And, my uncle doesn't want to be part of it anymore. Maybe I can do something. And I will be honest. I mean, we had people that when they, that in the whole process were really, really sensitive, really, really helpful, and really, really there for us. And we had other people that were, opportunistic.
Right.
And so that's what that's what I meant by that comment or whatever, that night or whatever, because I remember all of those. I remember all of those moments.
So when family dynamics get mixed in, it can get very interesting. And a lot of times we turn away and not do what we would do if it was a non-family member.
It's such a great point. There was a lot of things that I just kind of assumed were handled and taken care of. We were having, reviewed statements made and all that stuff. And, you get the big expensive looking binder and the cash flow analysis and all this stuff. And you're looking at it and you think, oh, okay, well, this is all being handled at the time, in various stages. I was in certain places in the business. And so I wasn't seeing really, the whole picture. Then, it turns out, some of the whole picture, even if I wanted to see, wasn't really available to me, as it turned out. And so, you tend to think, well, they got this, they've been doing it a long time, and it's family member and you trust, right? And so that's a great point. You're 100% right. And I think it is important to make sure that you are, keeping your accounts, to make sure you actually know what's going on. And so, that's, then, we ended up getting into the whole sales thing and on that thing. And that was a much more pleasant experience, frankly, than the first one. But still very, very difficult. And
did you sell to a strategic buyer that was already in the business, I would imagine?
Yeah. And in fact, a lot of the dealership world, that's kind of, and especially right now, there's a whole lot of consolidation going on in that. Right. This guy had a lot of stores. Yeah. And so I tried to figure out a way where I was going to do it. But, like a lot of these family things, it's kind of tough for the guy coming in. And here I'd had a lot of success in my life, and whatnot, but it's hard if you don't have the planning just right, it's hard to set it up for the next guy, depending on the dynamic. And so
when we were together, we spoke a lot about core values throughout generations, identity throughout generations. It sounds like a lot of that came into play during these times.
It sure did. Yeah.
I'm sure it was especially core values, very much tested.
Yeah. Core values were definitely tested. And, I mean, yeah, I think, in my case, I can honestly say, I sleep good at night. I really did my best for my family. I did my best for the people that we were with, for the community. And it's okay. We're kind of okay with that. We're doing things, differently at a whole lot of different pace right now.
So
But
tell us about the next chapter, right? So this was, you were positioning yourself to be the only owner.
yeah,
Unfortunately, that didn't happen. It didn't happen that way. But
unfortunately or unfortunately.
there you go. So
Yeah.
tell us about the next chapter and what you're looking forward to.
Something like this happens, and all of a sudden, the plans that you thought you had, are now very, very different. And I hadn't set myself up for the next shot. I hadn't really thought about what was going to happen next, where I was going to, take the thing after it was all done, and hadn't spent. I had devoted almost all of my time and energy to keeping the thing, going and, working and satisfying, making sure that the banks were getting paid and everything like
You were
that.
all in. You were putting all your energy towards it.
Exactly, yeah. And so then all of a sudden this moment happened where you're like, okay, well, if I can just get through this thing, then I'm going to be on the other side of this thing, and then I'll just figure it out from there. And that's, how could I have done it differently? I don't know. But I would have maybe, I'm not sure I could have done it any differently, but I found myself where all of a sudden you have this brass ring off in the distance, and you think, well, I could just get that thing and I'll get there. And then all of a sudden, after this thing happens, you're sitting there holding it and looking at it, and you're like, well, now I have this thing completed. What next? And, what I started, I obviously, coming from a finance background, I got back into the finance thing. I was, had been, doing investing, basically through the whole thing anyway. You can, as you can run a business and invest at the same time.
Yeah.
Like walking and chewing bubble gum. And so I kind of thought, well, I mean, I'll kind of go that direction, and which is what I started doing. So I started basically investing my own stuff. We had, I guess, what you might call in accounting a liquidity event.
Yep.
And, and just kind of doing that. But I, found myself, kind of 3 years into that. It was kind of a lonely place to be. I was used to dealing with a lot of people. I was used to having a lot of conversations, like, with people and talking. And all of a sudden now I'm basically alone in front of a computer all day, and reading annual reports all day. And which is a lot of fun. I like that, by the way. But I was missing people, which is what part of the reason that led me into this, the Mainstreet event. I was trying to really open that door back up, and I thought, man, I've gotten a lot of skills and abilities that are very, very valuable. But how could I transfer some of that experience? How could I invest my 39 years that I've gotten into my 40th year here? So it's actually, I saw you're into the whole traction and EOS thing on your website.
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast, and Trevor probably already knows this part because I was telling everybody at Mainstreet, but I was listening to a podcast, Ted Seides. He interviewed Brent Beshore, and I had heard about, the whole thing. And then my buddy, Rodney Mueller, who is a EOS coach actually here in St. Louis, Missouri, said, I just kind of called him up and I said, hey man, I'm trying to get out there and meet some people and figure out where this thing is going. Cause and he's like, oh, you ought to go to this event. I was like, oh, I know that. Yeah. And so I ended up showing up.
Interesting. The US traction piece of all the work that we do, it's the most impactful for our clients and their families, short term, midterm, long term.
Yeah.
It's kind of that outside party giving perspective, especially when you've got family members that are kind of in their own bubble, right? And an outside, party giving perspective on a framework that works and is transparent, and there's multiple people at the table helping to make decisions, not only on our, quarterly rocks and traction, as we call them, or goals, but on our 5-year bigger vision, et cetera, working backwards. And transparency is one of the biggest things. What kind of KPIs are we looking at? If we're not hitting in all departments, sales, marketing, operations, finance. And so it's really fun when we get in, and a lot of our clients are these Gen 1 family businesses, husband and wife, spousal kind of dynamics. And, Thor, you've seen them many times. I mean, one of my, just last month, we were running year-to-date financials as compared to last year. Bottom line doubled, top line 40% increase. Like that is changing their family.
Yeah,
Right.
fantastic.
and
Yeah.
and not working 80 hours a week. I mean, as entrepreneurs, we have so many ideas, and some of them are good, but we have to prioritize them and not burn out ourselves, our family, our team, and figuring out which ones are going to be the most impactful over the next quarter. And when we're organized, we can see profitability skyrocket. And, just in that meeting I was mentioning just a second ago, really it was the balance of their family life and their work life that is way more impactful, by hiring more people, delegating, not wearing so many hats, because 80 hours a week eating McDonald's is not going to last.
Well, it didn't. Like I say, I had
Yeah, right.
a serious health scare. I can
Yeah.
testify it doesn't last. And so yeah, it's a really important component, and it actually is it's really helpful that you've got a
Yeah.
framework for that.
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing that you're talking about. If you want to spend the time and develop your own framework or whatever, you can do that or whatever. But
Right.
it is really, especially like I say, when you say you're talking with a lot of first gen businesses right now.
Right. Right.
When eventually those businesses in your lifetime are going to be second gen.
Right.
And what is going to happen is that second generation is going to walk into something that they didn't create all that stuff.
Right.
And if you've got a manual that you can hand the person and they understand them, as opposed to getting in there and just figuring it out, it makes a big difference for continuity in a business like that. And
Well,
so really cool.
And in the topic of family business, there's so many layers to it, right? Because many times, Gen 1, we're just trying to build a business that is profitable and that can support the family. Goal number one, and a business that we're not burning out and we're enjoying and we're passionate about. And so hopefully we can get to that point where we're saying, okay, you know what? My kids are coming out of college. Maybe they're going to, be interested in it, or they're 12, 13 years old and, want to pick weeds, et cetera. How do I introduce them? How do we kind of create a playbook that this business is something that they would potentially be interested in? Because the stats show that building wealth and having the business in the family as long as possible creates the maximum amount of wealth, right? For the family over the long term. It's kind of, selling and private equity, it can be sexy for the liquidity event. And sometimes, as you kind of mentioned, we don't have a choice. That's not always an option to continue on the venture. But yeah, I mean, we're having a boatload of fun just exploring the nuances within this topic.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so many of them, and I've had a lot of conversations with guys, that are in family businesses as a result. I haven't quite gotten into all of the nasty details on some of the stuff, truth be told, because it's a little bit unpleasant to talk about most of it, most of that aspect of it, because 99% of it is positive and good. Yeah. That's the reality. Yeah, you can have these really, monumental things, and you could do yourself a great disservice by thinking, oh, well, that's that. But it's not. I mean, 99% of the time we were going in, we were having fun. We're driving a bunch of fast cars around the track and having fun and having big sales events and plating giant, 75-foot tall eagles with an American flag on it and, having fun. You know what I mean? That was 99% of it. There is 0.01% of it that was really difficult and unpleasant. And, and so, yeah, like you say, there are a lot of nuances. Every family business is like a snowflake. They're all different. So there's a whole lot going on there. Yes, like you say, over generations, you can, families can get a lot of wealth over the thing. But the other thing is that over generations, a lot of families can get a lot of culture. and a lot of identity from it.
Yep.
Working, with those people and in that environment and having that approach to sales and learning all those little tricks and tips that you did over the last 100 years, and you get that playbook or whatever. And there's only one way to do it, and that's by, learning from the people that came before you. And that's, like I say, that going back to the beginning of this conversation or earlier, getting to work with Mike Harrell, guy who would work with 4 generations of my family on that. I mean, how do you put a price on that? What would I have done differently? Yeah, nothing. I mean, and so really grateful for the opportunities that I've had. And like I say, really also grateful to get to talk to you guys today.
That's been an awesome conversation, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If we can come back, that would be awesome. Curtis, one of the things I would love to hear more about, and so many family businesses struggle with this, is knowing what you know now. What would, if you were your dad, were there some things that you would do differently? If you start a business now, how would you then set it up for your potential heirs? I think it's a very interesting dynamic when we start to dig into it, to see that, and it's a business, right? We're talking about business, but what about the effects on the family, the personal issues within, we have 5 brothers. Which one's going to be the CEO? Which one's going to be the CFO? Which one's going to be, does everyone get paid the same? Does everyone get the same amount of shares? What if somebody doesn't want to be in it? What do they get? So it's a very dynamic situation.
What kind of governance can you put in place? But that would be another hour-long conversation.
Yeah.
Let's do it. I'll raise my hand. I've enjoyed
I'd love to come back and get together with you guys again, and and talk more about that. Yeah, because I got a big list. Well, I'm telling you right now, I am going to do it differently. Obviously, I mean, and that's not because what we were doing was so bad before.
Right. But you just learn things.
Yeah, but as you learn things, and that's why conversations like this are so helpful. You know what I mean?